I've always been the kind of person who keeps to myself. I work from home, I mind my business, and I take a lot of pride in the house I built, both literally and figuratively. It's not some flashy mansion, just a cozy smart home setup, powered almost entirely by solar energy. Panels on the roof, battery storage in the back shed, the whole eco-friendly dream. I even got one of those sleek monitoring apps that lets me track every watt I generate and use. Everything was humming along perfectly, that is, until Karen entered the picture. Now, if you've never lived in an HOA-controlled neighborhood, you might not fully grasp the level of petty tyranny one person can exert when given a clipboard and the illusion of authority. Karen wasn't just a neighbor. She was the self-proclaimed enforcer of every rule, written or imagined. Grass too tall? Expect a warning. Trash bins placed half an inch from regulation? Violation notice. She was relentless, a walking fine dispenser, the queen of passive-aggressive power moves. But I tolerated her. Barely. Things started to feel off about 3 months ago. My power logs showed weird spikes at night, times when neither I nor my devices should have been using extra juice. At first I figured it was a software glitch. Maybe the system just needed an update. But the numbers didn't lie. Kilowatts were vanishing, and I wasn't the one using them. Then one evening I noticed something strange. An orange extension cord snaking out from behind my shed fence, nearly hidden in the shadows. It wasn't mine. That cord led somewhere. And the next morning, as I sipped my coffee and opened the app again, the numbers told me the truth. Someone was siphoning energy from my solar grid. And that's when it hit me. The one person in this entire neighborhood with the audacity, the arrogance, and the sheer Karenness to do something like this was exactly who I feared it would be. She was plugging her Tesla into my solar grid, like it was her God-given right. And she had no idea I was about to turn the sun against her. Karen wasn't just a neighbor. She was a storm system, disguised as a suburban woman, with a stack of bylaws and a Bluetooth earpiece permanently glued to her head. Her hair, stiff with hairspray, never moved, not even in hurricane-level wind, and her walk had the purposeful stomp of someone who truly believed the world needed her to keep it in order. She didn't work, at least not in any traditional sense. Her full-time job was policing the neighborhood. I swear she got more joy out of issuing warnings than most people get from their grandkids. The HOA had elected her as chair 3 years ago, and since then, she ruled the cul-de-sac like a mini-dictator. Nobody liked her, but most feared her. She had the kind of selective memory that could forget every act of kindness and remember every blade of grass cut half an inch too short. She wielded the community guidelines like a weapon, twisting them to suit whatever vendetta she'd picked that week. She had an arsenal of laminated pamphlets, citations ready to drop in your mailbox at a moment's notice, and a terrifying ability to quote obscure rules from memory, like some twisted suburban librarian. I tried to stay off her radar. My yard was immaculate. My bins were wheeled back in within minutes of trash collection. I even kept my dog inside on quiet nights, just in case barking too loudly gave her an excuse to knock on my door. But despite my best efforts, she always found something. Once, she gave me a formal warning, because the solar panels on my roof weren't aesthetically consistent with the neighborhood's rustic charm. Rustic charm? We lived in prefab townhouses with vinyl siding and faux shutters. But I didn't argue. I just nodded, smiled, and walked back inside. Still, I always had the feeling Karen was watching me a little closer than the others. Maybe it was because I didn't flinch when she threatened to report violations. Maybe it was because my house ran so smoothly without needing her input. Or maybe it was because she didn't understand how the solar system worked, and that made her uncomfortable. Whatever it was, I could feel her eyes every time I opened the garage. And behind that tight smile of hers, I knew she was just waiting for something to pounce on. But I had no idea she'd go this far, stealing my energy, plugging her luxury car into my system. That wasn't just rule breaking, that was war. And Karen, bless her delusional heart, had picked a fight with the wrong neighbor. It started with numbers. I've always been a data guy. Numbers don't lie, people do. Every morning I check my solar dashboard while the coffee brews. It's become a kind of ritual. Most days, the pattern is predictable. Energy produced, energy consumed, battery charge level, export to the grid. It's all clean and balanced. But then, one Tuesday, something was off. My overnight usage had jumped, not by a little, by a lot. Enough to trigger a red flag on the app, the kind that only shows up when there's either a hardware issue or someone's running a small concert off your breaker box. At first, I assumed it was a system hiccup. Maybe the inverter glitched or a firmware update failed. I rebooted everything. Still, the data persisted. The spike was real, and it was happening consistently, between midnight and 3 a.m. every single night. The thing was, nothing in my house ran during those hours. No appliances, no lights, not even the HVAC. I live alone, and I'm obsessive about energy efficiency. If something was drawing power that aggressively, I would have noticed. And yet, here it was, clear as day on my graphs. Unaccounted consumption. Someone or something was feeding off my solar supply. So I started digging. I went into the logs, traced the flow, analyzed the output curves, and compared it against my battery storage. It wasn't internal. This was coming from outside, an external draw. That's when I started thinking like an engineer, but also like a paranoid neighbor. Could someone actually be tapping into my system? It sounded crazy, but the numbers didn't leave room for fantasy. I checked the cabling around my shed, the main lines, and found nothing obvious. But that only made me more suspicious. Then, one night around 1 a.m., I woke up, restless, and decided to look outside. Something caught my eye. A flicker. A faint orange line snaking through the shadows of my fence. The same line I'd barely noticed the morning before. It disappeared behind my utility panel, and it didn't belong to me. That's when the pieces started clicking into place. The energy spike, the strange chord, the timing, and most of all, the fact that the only person nosy and entitled enough to do something like this was living 2 doors down, smug and silent in her freshly power-washed driveway. Karen. I didn't have proof yet, but I had a gut feeling, and it was about to lead me straight into the kind of confrontation I thought only happened in Reddit stories. The night I decided to catch her wasn't particularly special. No full moon, no dramatic thunder. Just a quiet Wednesday with the usual buzz of crickets and the faint hum of the battery bank tucked behind my shed. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want anyone to talk me out of it. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to know if Karen was really capable of doing what I suspected. So I grabbed a lawn chair, a thermos of coffee, and my phone with the security camera feed pulled up, and I waited. From my vantage point in the shadows of my patio, I could see the corner of my utility shed and the narrow side yard that led toward Karen's place. It was dark, but not too dark, just enough that any movement would catch the eye if you were paying attention. Midnight came and went. Nothing. My eyelids started to droop, the coffee no longer helping. And then, at precisely 12:42 a.m., I heard it. A soft metallic click, the unmistakable sound of a charging port opening. I leaned forward, heart suddenly racing. Through the slats of the fence I saw her. Karen, in a full matching velour tracksuit no less. She moved with this bizarre confidence, like someone who'd done it before. She uncoiled the orange extension cord with practiced precision, plugged one end into her sleek, silent Tesla, and the other end into my junction box. I couldn't believe it. She didn't hesitate, Didn't even glance around to check if anyone was watching. This wasn't a one-time emergency charge. This was a routine. She'd been doing this for weeks, maybe months, stealing my solar energy in the dead of night like some suburban energy vampire. I watched the Tesla's charging port light up green. My app pinged a new draw from the system. The numbers didn't lie. This was it. This was the smoking gun. Karen was literally plugging her luxury car into my solar grid like it was her personal fueling station. All without asking, without notifying, without even the decency to hide it better. I took pictures, video, documented everything. Not because I was planning to go nuclear yet, but because I wanted backup, evidence, proof that I wasn't losing my mind. But as I sat there in the dark, watching her walk back to her house like nothing was wrong, it hit me. Karen wasn't just entitled. She was fearless. And that kind of arrogance only gets cured one way. That was the moment I decided I wasn't just going to catch her. I was going to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. I showed up to the next HOA meeting with a folder in my hand and fire in my chest. Normally, I avoid these things like the plague. 2 hours of petty complaints about lawn decorations and fence colors. But this time, I had a reason to be there. I waited patiently as the board droned through their agenda, nodding politely while the treasurer read off garden maintenance budgets and someone complained about teenagers skateboarding near the fountain. But the moment they opened the floor for resident concerns, I stood up and said just loud enough to turn heads, "I have something to share. It's about energy theft." That got their attention. I walked to the front, unfolded my folder, and placed it on the table with deliberate calm. Photos of the extension cord, time-stamped screenshots of my solar app's usage spikes, even a grainy night vision still of Karen in her tracksuit, mid-theft. I laid it all out with the precision of a courtroom prosecutor. My tone stayed calm, measured. I didn't even say her name. I just presented the facts and let the evidence do the talking. And that's when Karen stood up. At first, she laughed, an airy, dismissive little sound that made my blood boil. Then came the gasp, the performance. She clutched her chest, appalled, flabbergasted at the very idea. "This is absurd," she said. "I would never plug into someone else's system. That's dangerous. It's trespassing. He's obviously mistaken. Or fabricating this." And just like that, the narrative began to shift. She turned the tables like a pro, framing herself as the victim of a bizarre vendetta. She claimed the photos were doctored, that the cable wasn't hers, that I'd always had a problem with her leadership. She even went so far as to say I was spreading paranoia in the community and undermining neighborly trust. And you know what? Some of them bought it. The board members exchanged glances. One asked me why I didn't just confront her directly. Another wondered aloud if maybe a neighborhood kid was behind it, just fooling around. Karen smiled at that one, nodded like she appreciated their open-mindedness. I could feel the momentum shifting, the ground slipping. It didn't matter how clean my data was, she was spinning the story faster than I could anchor it. In the end, the board thanked me for bringing it to their attention and said they would investigate. Karen offered to cooperate fully and suggested installing more cameras on my property. It was a masterclass in deflection. I walked out of that room with my evidence untouched, my credibility dented, and the bitter taste of injustice in my mouth. Karen had denied everything, boldly, publicly, with a smile. But I knew the truth. And she knew that I knew. So I stopped trying to prove it to anyone else. From that moment forward, I planned my revenge. Not with rage, but with calculation. If she wanted to play games with power, then it was time she experienced what it really meant to plug into something she didn't understand. I didn't sleep much the night after the HOA meeting. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smug expression, heard her voice twisting my words. felt the silent applause from people too timid to challenge her. She had lied, without hesitation, without shame, and worse, she'd made me look like the lunatic. That's when I realized this wasn't about energy anymore. This was about control, and I was done letting her win. The beauty of owning your own solar grid is the control it gives you, not just over what you produce, but over what you allow others to take. Karen had made a mistake. She assumed I was passive, a pushover, just another quiet guy with a fancy setup and no spine. What she didn't know was that I'd designed the entire system myself. I knew every wire, every circuit, every protective measure. And now, I was going to use that knowledge to deliver justice, not through violence or confrontation, but through electricity. The plan was simple in theory, complicated in execution. I didn't want to destroy her Tesla. That would have been illegal and, frankly, too obvious. No, I wanted to spook her, embarrass her, make her think twice before ever siphoning a single volt again. I installed a surge redirector between my junction box and the auxiliary output she'd been tapping into. It was a harmless modification, technically. Instead of delivering a smooth, even current, the modified port would cycle short pulses at a higher voltage for a fraction of a second, just enough to confuse any unauthorized load and trigger a fault response. To anyone else, it would look like a system error, a weird glitch, maybe a bad cable. But to me, it would be confirmation that the thief was still plugging in. And if she was dumb enough to do it again, her fancy car would throw every error code in the book. For days, I fine-tuned the setup. I tested it with decoy draws, monitored it with live data logs, ensured no damage could ripple back into my core system. It was surgical, silent, and it wouldn't trip a single legal wire. I even added a new security camera, hidden in a faux birdhouse aimed perfectly at the shed. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. The following Wednesday night, like clockwork, I saw the orange cord stretch across my property again. The Tesla blinked awake with its soft, futuristic glow. The charger clicked into place. And then the surge activated. Just a flicker, just enough. I watched the dashboard light turn from green to yellow to red. Watched the charging abort. Watched her walk out in her robe, confused, staring at the blinking indicators like they'd personally betrayed her. I sipped my tea, smiling in the shadows. She had no idea what I'd done. But the grid did, and it was just getting started. It was around 1:30 in the morning when it happened. I had just finished reviewing the surge logs on my laptop when the quiet hum of the night was broken by a loud, electronic chirp, the kind a Tesla makes when something goes seriously wrong. I stepped onto my back porch, staying in the shadows, and looked toward the end of my property where my utility shed met the edge of Karen's driveway. Her Tesla sat there in all its smug, gleaming arrogance, plugged in like it owned the place. Then the light show began. First came the flickering, tiny, inconsistent pulses of the charging port light. It switched from green to amber, then red, then off, then back again. The vehicle clearly didn't know what was happening, but it knew something was wrong. Seconds later, a dull pop echoed from under the hood, followed by the sound of fans kicking into overdrive. The touchscreen inside the car glitched, flashing error messages too quickly to read from a distance. The entire car began to twitch, its systems panicking in real time. And then came the smell, that unmistakable tang of overheating electronics, subtle but sharp in the breeze. A minute passed, maybe two. The Tesla began to emit a steady beeping noise, like it was crying for help. And then the horn blared, long, loud, and continuous. I nearly laughed. It was like the car itself was protesting its unauthorized connection to my solar grid. Inside her house, I saw a light switch on. A door opened, and out came Karen, wrapped in a robe and confusion. She ran toward her car, yelling something I couldn't make out, and yanked the cord from its charging port. The horn stopped. The lights dimmed. But the smell lingered, and so did the damage. She stood there in the driveway, barefoot on the cold concrete, staring at her now disabled prize like it had betrayed her. Her hands were on her hips, then on her head, pacing, shaking her phone in frustration. I could tell she was trying to reboot it from the app, trying to diagnose what had just happened. Then came the fire truck. It wasn't flames exactly, but Karen must have panicked, because 5 minutes later, the street lit up with red and white flashing lights. Firefighters climbed out, looked at the car, ran a quick diagnostic, and ultimately shrugged. No fire, no emergency. Just an EV that had mysteriously freaked out during a routine overnight charge. One of them tapped the battery compartment with a gloved knuckle, then spoke the words, "I'll never forget." Looks like it didn't like whatever it was plugged into. Karen didn't reply. She just stood there, stunned, clutching that orange extension cord like it had turned on her. She didn't look up once, didn't check to see who might be watching. But I was. I watched the whole thing unfold from my back porch, sipping my tea, feeling nothing but the deep, satisfying calm of solar-powered vengeance. She wouldn't plug into me again. Not after this. The morning after the Tesla debacle, the entire neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Karen's meltdown had made the rounds before sunrise. Apparently, one of the firefighters mentioned the strange electrical behavior to a neighbor, who then repeated it to another, and by the time I walked out to collect my mail, 2 people had already stopped me with thinly veiled questions. Did I see what happened? Had I heard the sirens? "That poor woman," one of them said, shaking her head. "Her car just stopped working in the middle of the night." I just nodded, smiled, said something about power being unpredictable these days. But I knew exactly what had happened, and more importantly, so did Karen. That evening she did something she hadn't done in months. She came to my door. No warning, no clipboard, no HOA badge around her neck. Just Karen, robe replaced by a stiff cardigan, standing on my porch with that frozen smile she used when she needed something. I opened the door just enough to let the awkward silence settle between us. She didn't accuse me, not directly. She asked vague questions about surges and solar interference, about whether anyone else had experienced issues with their power. I let her talk, watching her try to connect dots without admitting she'd ever crossed a line. And when she paused, waiting for me to offer help or information, I simply said, "My system's been working perfectly." Her face didn't twitch, but something shifted in her eyes. A flicker of resignation. She knew the game was over. She turned without another word and walked back to her house, slower than usual. No threats, no warnings, just silence. The next HOA meeting was different. For the first time, Karen didn't speak. She didn't submit complaints or enforce rules. In fact, she barely looked up from her notes. A week later, an emergency board email went out. Due to unforeseen personal matters, Karen will be stepping down as HOA chair effective immediately. The neighborhood sighed in relief. 3 weeks after that, a for sale sign appeared on her front lawn. It stood there like a monument to poetic justice. She didn't host an open house, didn't throw a farewell party, just packed her things and vanished quietly, like a glitch in the system finally erased. When the moving truck pulled away, I stood at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, watching the last of her things disappear. The cord was gone, the Tesla too. All that remained was the faint smell of burnt ego and the knowledge that some people have to be taught the hard way. She picked the wrong system to plug into, and it cost her everything. It's strange how quiet the neighborhood felt after she left. Not just in sound, but in energy. Like a weight had been lifted, a constant static finally silenced. For the first time in months, no one was peeking over fences, measuring grass height with a ruler, or sending out passive-aggressive HOA memos about mailbox paint colors. People waved more, conversations lingered. Even the air felt easier to breathe. Peace had returned, not with a grand announcement, but with the slow exhale of collective relief. I took the opportunity to upgrade my system further. Installed a new biometric lock on the utility shed. Upgraded the software with anomaly alerts and an auto-disconnect feature. Not because I expected another Karen, but because I knew eventually someone would try something again. Entitlement isn't exclusive. It just moves from person to person like a virus. But now, I was ready. The house was smarter. The grid was locked down. And I wasn't the quiet guy anymore. I was the neighbor who didn't forget. Every now and then, someone in the community brings her up. Usually in hushed tones, like they're afraid she'll appear if they speak her name too loudly. Remember when Karen tried to rewrite the bylaws to ban porch lights? Someone might say with a chuckle. Or, she ever figure out what fried her Tesla? That one always earns a few knowing glances. I never tell them. Instead, I write. I started a small blog for solar enthusiasts, mostly harmless tips about grid efficiency and storage capacity. But tucked in there, under the articles about battery backups and inverter calibration, is one story labeled simply The Leech. It doesn't name names, doesn't mention Tesla or HOAs, but it ends with a message I stand by. If you steal sunshine from someone who spent years learning how to control it, don't be surprised when it burns you. Technology is neutral, people aren't. And the next Karen, who thinks they can tap into what's not theirs, they better pray I'm not watching. Sometimes, late at night when everything's still, I sit on the back porch with a cup of tea and think about the whole thing. The chaos, the Tesla, the firetruck, the fallout. I replay it all, not out of guilt, but out of curiosity. Wondering where the line is between doing what's right and doing what feels right. On paper, I didn't break any laws. I didn't touch her car. I didn't hack, tamper, or sabotage. I just let the system respond to what it saw as a threat, because that's what she was. A threat to boundaries, to privacy, to the basic principle that what's mine isn't up for grabs just because you want it. Still, there's a part of me that wonders, was I the villain in her story? Was I the neighbor who escalated instead of forgave? Who played God with voltage and watched her world crumble like it was a show made just for me? Maybe. Maybe she tells it that way now, to friends in some new suburb, warning them about psycho tech guys with power complexes. Maybe she even believes it. But here's the thing. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear hoodies and program surge cycles. And villains? They don't always cackle or scheme. Sometimes they just quietly take what isn't theirs and act surprised when there are consequences. I didn't set out to be anything. Not a hero, not a vigilante. I just wanted peace and I got it. Not by force, not through violence, just through knowledge, patience, and a little bit of perfectly timed karma. So, was I the villain or the hero? Depends on who's telling the story. But in my version, I was just a guy protecting his home from the wrong plug-in at the wrong time. And I don't regret a single watt.